everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Waffle Press Hangouts, the first episode of March 2021. We're still indoors, and I'm still your host, Diego Crespo. Still with me is my co-host, Gina Versa. How are you?
Hey, how you doing? Good to see you again, my friend.
Yeah, good to see you too. I am exhausted, but not for the reasons you may think. How are you doing, Gene? What's up? What's new with you? I think we have something new together, actually.
Yes. Yeah, I'm doing well, healthy. Me and my family, we were all vaccinated in the last month. My grandpa got it first, then my dad, then me and my mom. And yeah, I've been helping them with that and kind of living there. But I'm very thankful and fortunate that my family is healthy right now, and yours as well.
Yeah, so far,
Yes.
yeah, both got vaccinated, and it was a complete luck of the draw surprise moment where USC basically had an overflow, and the word got out very fast, and I and many of my loved ones and some friends were able to go get it. And quite frankly, not from the, I guess, most popular communities in the country. And I don't know when we would have been vaccinated otherwise. And so I'm very grateful for that. And I do wish that the rollout was going a little better and steadier. I'm going to take the ones I can get, but I won't stop banging the drum because like this is not acceptable, quite frankly.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah, let's just talk about the vaccine before we get into the
Sure.
episode. People talk about post injection symptoms. I had a minor soreness with my arm, and then I felt fine. A relative of mine who's a bigger dude, over 6 feet big, complained of a sore arm all day, and then that was it. How about you? Anything on report?
Oh yeah. So I personally just had I had it in my left arm, left shoulder here. It felt sore the next day, like if I had a bruise, like someone maybe hit me in the arm, but maybe I tensed up my arm or what have you. So I was completely fine. My mom had a very slight headache, and my dad and my grandpa, they did not have any symptoms whatsoever. They were fine. So that was my experience.
Yeah, and you know what? Better than COVID. So
Yes, yeah, exactly. I
um
had yeah,
oh,
yeah. I was gonna tell you that I wouldn't wish that on anyone because last summer, all my roommates got it except me, and young people, they get fevers, they get their body aches. It's not fun to have it. So do your part and stay safe and get vaccinated when you
down
can.
below to the website that I registered through, CalVax. It's for California residents only. I'm sorry, but obviously we'll share whatever we can on our social medias. The more we learn about public access to this stuff, because that's important. But also here to help us talk about outbreaks and vaccines, and I promise movie discussions at some point, is our old friend Soren Hough. How? I'm sorry, I fucked that up, didn't I? Hello. I'm so sorry. Is
It's
it
totally
how?
fine. It's how, but it doesn't
Okay.
matter.
Okay.
That's it.
Soren Hough. I said it right. I will leave it though because I'm a man of honesty.
Yeah. Well,
Well, it's great to be here. It's good to be back on Waffle Press. It's
yeah.
been I feel like years.
Yeah. I was trying to look through our archives, and I believe the last one that you were on with Diego was for the Star Wars, which was 6 years, almost 6 years ago.
Yeah. So we did Attack of the Clones, where we were revisiting. I think it was this was in the lead up to The Force Awakens, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow.
And Diego was doing that whole. He had a whole it was like a cinematic introduction, and it was a whole thing. But that was really fun, actually. It was really cool to go back and look at those movies from at the time, a modern perspective, and reflect on them, and find that actually there was more merit there than I had anticipated. I think before that we were we did an episode on Age of Ultron, where I think I was sort of on the attack, and I think Diego was defending. And then I think more recently than either of those, though, Diego came on to podcast over at Movie Fail when we were talking about onto Stark Contrast when we were talking about I think The Long Night or something from Game of Thrones.
Yeah, that's right. The best Game of Thrones podcast back in the day. I genuinely mean that.
Mhm.
Does that
Everyone
mean we
else,
have to start a new podcast on the new prequel series?
Dance
I don't
with
think Esther will
Dragons.
do it, to be honest with you.
you don't have that. We saw the rest of Game of Thrones. We got it. You know.
Yeah.
We got the gist.
Did you
Yeah.
like?
It's enough
Did you?
already.
Yeah. Did you like the last season though? Last Soren.
No. You should listen to the last few episodes of that podcast where we had some guests on. It's so funny because every time someone comes on, I'm just like, make it stop. I just want this to end. This is so painful.
I will genuinely link down to that podcast because not just because that episode was excellent, but like you and Esther had like such a fun rapport,
Mhm.
and through the journey of the show, you two caught it, like you called it way earlier, not just in terms of like, Esther just like called a lot of stuff, but like everyone slowly turned on the show, but you two understood immediately, like, no, this isn't the same show anymore. That it's going downhill, and it
Well,
Yeah,
it was towards the end of in the last season, we kept saying, you know, everyone's catching up to us. Like we called this so long ago. I mean, the truth is, I think a lot of people really consider it's like season 7 and 8 were particularly bad. But I think if people go back and really watch it and see it all together, it'll be quite obvious that it starts earlier, like the problems.
yeah. Like,
I,
was it
I that
the?
season 5 is the worst one. I still think season 5 is like an unwatchable season of television with like exceptions, right?
But it has the Battle of the Bastards, which was really good.
That's true.
Right?
No, season
Oh.
season
Really?
5. Season 5 has Hard Home though, which is
Hard Home is great.
Yeah, that's like
Is,
that season. Everything else is just like,
Well, so this is the thing. Not to turn this into a Game of Thrones podcast, but we it was actually on the episode with you, Diego, that we started the Save Us Sapochnik Save Us or Save Us Sapochnik hashtag, and actually I think isn't he show running one of the new shows, so that's why it feels like it kind of maybe, but I don't know.
hey, look, if you get the David
Fool me
off,
once.
get the
if you get
David.
back, he might be able to make it, because that dude's like a fantastic director,
Yeah.
at least. But like, so I don't know, maybe he could work some of his magic. I won't hold my breath though.
Yeah. We'll see. Yeah, at least we have the spin-offs and stuff, and the Davids are gone, and they're not going to do that Confederate show or Star Wars. No one knows
They're
what
not doing
they're
Star Wars either.
Yeah, the show that they kind of bailed on Game of Thrones for, they're not
Right.
even doing that.
Right, I know they weren't doing Confederate, but the Star Wars series that they were going to do, are they not doing that?
Yeah, they're gone. They're done.
Oh wow, okay. Well,
Yeah,
probably for the best.
probably.
Probably. But
Yes.
really quick, we usually ask guests like how they're doing in these times. How have you been, Soren?
Actually doing all right. So I actually live in the you can't tell from my obviously very real background because I'm definitely in the middle of the woods right now. But no, I'm actually overseas. I live in the UK now, and so the whole dynamic's a bit different here. In some ways, in other ways, it's very similar in that we're in a national lockdown, and state by state, you have similar things going on across America. But yeah, I mean, it's just a bit weird. I think not since the spring of last year has there been a full lockdown quite like there was before. So in the beginning, there was like 3 months where we weren't going into work and things like that, at least for scientists, which is what I do for my day job. And in the recent lockdown, they made allowances for certain people who couldn't work from home. So like scientists can't work from home. Obviously, they don't have a lab at their house. So the only way to really work was to go into the lab. So I actually get to go into work on shift schedules. So it's a bit weird, and there's a lot of weird regulations at work, and we wear masks the entire time, and it's a whole thing. So for me, it's a bit more normal. My partner, unfortunately, is stuck at home working, but working from home, and has been for basically a year plus now, and it's a bit maddening. It's tough to be stuck, and we live in a studio flat, so it's very dull. It's not like there's not like multiple rooms or like places to go or ways to sort of cordon off the desk area where I'm sitting, where the bed is like 2 feet away from me right now. That's so you get a little bit of cabin fever in that sense. On the other hand, of the things that I could be dealing with in a pandemic, these are all non-issues really, and I think that we are doing quite well for that. So thankfully, and we also have the benefit of so I live at the university that I'm attending, and we get tested regular, or I get tested every week, and so I have that access, and of course we have the wonderful NHS, so we also have free medicine, so that's nice.
Rub it in, don't you?
Well, I'll say this: you both got vaccinated. I haven't been vaccinated yet. I won't get vaccinated for some time. But by the time we get vaccinated, it'll basically be the last few people in the country will be vaccinated, and so
Yeah.
it's a smaller country. It's a little, weird plague island. So, it's
like 28 days later, I imagine. No.
But no, yeah, that's good. Glad to see, you and your partner are safe, and in just a country that's taking it seriously and doing as best they can in these times.
Yeah, I mean, it is true that relative to America, we've done quite well here. The bar not set terribly high by the previous administration, and to some extent this administration. But on the other hand, relative to a lot of Europe and other places, the UK is often the one that people point at and suggest doesn't know what they're doing, and they act too slowly and so on. I think yeah, it really it runs the gamut, right? And then you have random places in across Europe that have huge spikes and problems and things like that. So I think it's all quite variable in that sense.
Yeah.
But by and large, I think we're doing all right. And there's always that fallback of having that healthcare system, which I think is really important, because I think what people don't think about is it's not just that the healthcare is free. I mean, it's we pay for it through taxes, and I get to benefit from it too as a resident, but also that it is a way of coordinating rollout. So the whole country, so everyone's on a list of like who's going to get vaccine when, and it's not sort of segregated off from hospital to hospital or whoever your doctor is. It's just you will get a call, they will set you up for an appointment, you will go and get and that can be coordinated from a sort of centralized system or nationalized system, where it's a bit more difficult to do if you've got different states with different rules and different plans, and some people have insurance and some people don't, and to be honest, if I was in the States, I have no idea how I'd even start to go about getting a vaccine.
Yeah, I just put together this tutorial video actually for registration in LA County, and it's because a lot of people were having trouble, and it's a little bit convoluted because it's run by like 4 different entities. So it's like LA County, the fire department of LA, clinics, and then like supermarkets. So they're all like different. Like if you were trying to buy like tickets on StubHub or like different like ticket buyers, is kind of like what it came down to. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's just it would be nice, like, yeah, because it's like you have elderly people that don't know how to use the computer, or could not have computer access, or people that don't have computer access, and it's just, yeah, it could be a lot better. And like,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, they still run into those problems here. So the first group to be immunized were largely older people, but they tried to do things like call them where possible, because obviously it's you can send an email, but it's not very likely to get through. But yeah, I mean, basically here we all have national insurance numbers, which are a bit kind of like social security numbers in a way, and so they can just go through that list and just contact people through that method. And I think that's very helpful to the rollout, and it's why I think they're actually ahead of schedule here in terms of vaccinations. So while I haven't been vaccinated and I'm not a priority, and I also get tested all the time, for the people who need it, I think they're getting it quite quickly, which is good. Which is good.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's just yeah, it's just like such unprecedented like thing.
Yeah, definitely. It's and it's very weird because um well, we'll talk about that later, I guess,
Mhm.
but just the realities of the pandemic, especially, it's how it intersects with our social systems. So things like how we've set up even our government, or how we set up how systems have prevented certain groups from making money, and therefore they live in particular areas, and thus, don't have access to the vaccine, right? Like, it's connected on multiple levels to historical precedent, and it doesn't just start with the pandemic. You have to go back some way to sort of connect it. Or like, why don't we have a universal healthcare system in the states? And then, that has day-to-day consequences for people who need healthcare, but has a lot of consequences in the context of a pandemic. But these are issues that like predated the pandemic and then become exacerbated in the context of the pandemic. So yeah, it's a weird time.
Yeah, I was because we put in our document the article that you recently published with Noah Chomsky, and kind of talking it was about COVID-19 and climate change, but kind of in the article you were both going over a lot of topics where a lot of these COVID problems come from like systematic issues.
Yeah, no, exactly. So yeah, that was a interview. So the interview with Chomsky was done at Science for the People magazine, where I'm also an editor, and that magazine's goal is to sort of discuss. It's often written, though not always, by scientists, but with a goal of targeting a broader audience. And our interest is in talking about the real science, not pseudoscience and the rest of it. So acknowledging what the actual data says, but then also discussing what um, how that data, again, like I said, intersects with how society operates. So, who gets to collect the data? How do we collect the data? Who gets to interpret the data? Who funds the data? Who gets the funding for the collection of the data? Et cetera, et cetera. And so, if I go and do an experiment, but then that data ends up getting used by um, a company or the military, or maybe a really great organization that does good work, or whatever, um, to acknowledge that that's a reality and that we should be involved in that process, and not just say like, when we do science, it exists in a vacuum. And so talking to Professor Chomsky, that was sort of the crux of a lot of what we were talking about, which is that a lot of these issues like climate change and so on are connected, and the climate science that's being done has uh, the data is being generated, but then it gets interpreted in a certain way. So, for example, climate science has been very clear about how um, the sort of the cascade effect of the fossil fuel industry and greenhouse gas emissions, and the effect that has on how the planet's changing, from melting ice to acidification of the oceans, et cetera, right? And that the data was produced by climate scientists, but then you still have to do something with the data. You have to take action. You have to, and so uh, what ended up happening instead was like sort of a PR campaign to try and pretend like climate change wasn't real, and this was contra to, and then so you have climate scientists saying one thing, you have fossil fuel industries doing the research to show that climate change is real, and then suppressing the results from their own research. And that's another example of, the data doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It's being either suppressed, or it's being and we see this with COVID-19, right? You see this all the time with there was that woman in Florida, right, who was posting the correct numbers for COVID, but was told to post different numbers, and she ended up getting arrested for refusing to follow the governor's order or something like that. I don't remember the exact details, but that's exactly what we're talking about. That you can produce all the data you want, but if it ends up getting taken by nefarious interests, then then it can be used to hurt people. And so that was a lot of that discussion. It was really engaging. I hope people, or I found him very engaging. I hope people find the interview interesting as well.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading it, and he's such an interesting fellow, and you know yeah, just hearing him talk, or excuse me, reading him talk and everything. Because I think on when you posted that article on your Facebook, I was like, oh, thank you, like, for doing this interview, because it was a breath of fresh air after that bad faith podcast.
Oh yeah, exactly, yeah. And we steered to topics I felt would be, we would be on the same page, and it was really, I think, helpful to and we also tried to capture his manner. So I think that hopefully that came across in the
Mhm.
transcript. But yeah, and again, he's very interested in the way these systems have existed and continue to exist. So, he connects a lot of what's going on now, and I think he's absolutely right. And I think the public health research bears this out, that the Reagan and Thatcher era and the dawn of neoliberalism, this laissez-faire sort of economic system, is that was perpetuated across the spectrum. Bill Clinton, George Bush, etc. These, and very deregulatory, etc. So that's how you have what's going on in Texas right now, right? That is entirely a failure of a completely deregulated energy grid, right? Is a perfect example of that. But this is all a long consequence of what for Chomsky started in at least in its current incarnation in the 80s, with Milton Friedman, with Reagan, etc. And so you get massive deregulation, you get total defunding of public sector support services, and so you have people now who are suffering from lack of access to social programs, say welfare or whatever the case may be, that are historically were cut ages ago, but now in this particular environment, it's so bad that it becomes even more exacerbated. So, and you have this, I mean, that happened in the UK as well, as I say, under Thatcher, and there's a lot of fallout effect from the sort of austerity measures that were put in place to reduce social safety nets, even though we still have things here like the NHS, which, as I say, is a great system. But then there were consequences to austerity that have been actually directly linked to health outcomes, including in the pandemic. And there's actually, I have an upcoming article on this exact subject, an interview with Sir Michael Marmot, who is a professor of public health at UCL, and his whole subject area is discussing social determinants of health. So how your socioeconomic status affects your health. And we talked about COVID-19, and what his data shows is that not only is this a real phenomenon, the socioeconomic effect on your health, but in COVID-19, sort of the poles of the most extreme effects. So if you're very wealthy, you do better, and if you're very poor, you might do much worse. And this also affects across race and gender. There's additive effects, but those poles are skewed even more in the context of COVID-19. Like, it took what was already bad and made it way, 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 way worse for people who are living at the very ends of things, or much better. And so that it's sort of an unfortunate but useful magnifying glass on the issues that we were facing in the first place.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's just like, would you say it's kind of like a caste system in a way?
I mean, yeah, that's essentially how it lines up. It's actually kind of shocking. I mean, if anybody is interested, look up Michael Marmot, look up the Whitehall studies, and just look at some of the graphs. I mean, they're actually kind of shocking, where you just see direct correlation between people's salaries and their income and their health outcomes.
Yeah.
Or you look at, for example, that there's a general view that, like, everyone's sort of doing better year on year, and that even if you're poor, like, it's better now than it was 10 years ago. But depending on it, it really depends on your condition. It's not just, it's, for men, maybe that might be true, but for women, it might not be true. It might even be worse than it was, 10 years ago, for poor women, specifically, this sort of subsection. So yeah, and it's the way, I mean, the truth of it is that it's sort of premised on this broad base, this sort of pyramid-like structure that we've built society on, right? And the way that these I mean, the very nature of a pyramid structure is that you need a lot on the bottom to support the top, but then there needs to be a lot on the bottom, and that just has to perpetuate itself. Otherwise, you no longer have a hierarchy, right? And I mean, that would be, in my view, a much better society. But that is the way society currently runs, and that hierarchy, you can look at any number of ways, right? There's your wealth, there's race, there's gender, there's sexuality, there's religion, etc. And these things all are maintained in this sort of structure. And if the top of that pyramid has access to things that the bottom of the pyramid doesn't, then if you just slice it horizontally, you're going to get way more people who, let's say, don't have access to healthcare than people who do, because to have access, you have to be part of a much smaller group of people. So in a way, yeah, I would say it's sort of a caste. I mean, it's a class system. I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Because like trickle down economics from all the Reaganism does not work. Like like that trickle is not going to come. It's going to like stay at the top, and you see it in like other parts of our society and everything. And it's just it's just sad.
There's a great quote from Leslie Feinberg, who was a great activist, who
Oh,
said,
I think I've heard this.
for those of us who have been trickled on, we're kind of sick of it. For those, and an argument to people who argue for trickle down economics, with this idea that it's a narrative, right? And it's exactly. I mean, Art Laffer came up with this idea, the Laffer curve, which is that um, if you cut taxes uh, on wealthy people because they're wealth creators,
Hmm.
whatever that means, then you will make the money back. That the economy will be able to bounce back from this. It's never been true. It's absolute nonsense. It was something he drew on a napkin, and people thought he was a genius, but it's just nonsense. And I don't know if they actually thought he was a genius, or they just thought, well, if this were true, it would be really good for me, so I'm just going to perpetuate it. I don't know, but for whatever the sort of origins of that were, um, it was tried 1,000 times. It was the origin of the Bush tax cuts, the Trump tax cuts, Reagan's worldview. I mean, it's just on and on and on. If you look at Sam Brownback when he was a governor, he tried it in his state, and it was an absolute just every single time they do not make the money back. Everyone suffers for it. The only people who benefit are wealthy people.
Yeah.
But the idea that helps anyone else is just it can't have been proven more wrong, and yet it will be raised again. Mark my words, as a brilliant idea. In about 5 years, and everyone's going to have collective amnesia about it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, our old econ teacher from like high school used to have a saying where it's like, trickle down economics is not trickling down; it's like pissing on you. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah, I think that was the gist of Leslie Feinberg's
yeah.
vision of it. Exactly. So yeah, it's not based in reality, and I don't know why anybody would think it would be. Conversely, imagine if you took from the bottom of that pyramid and you gave all of the people on the bottom you forgave their debt, or you provided them some sort of stimulus check. What a
Hmm.
concept! Um, Surely that would have a greater stimulating effect on the economy. I can see how that would work. I mean, look, it's not like the hypothesis was totally wild. I mean, sure, maybe it would work, but you've tried it, it doesn't work, but maybe we should try something else then. And when they do it, they see quite impressive effects. I mean, the reality is that from all the research I've seen, and I'm not a sociologist, but when people get money straight up, not tax credits, not, some sort of weird Rube Goldberg machine that eventually gives you some sort of benefit on the back end, but actually gives you money, the effects are always better for the people, for the economy, etc. And I don't know what the reticence is with doing that, especially if you are if your goal is to support the top of the pyramid. Giving more people at the bottom of the pyramid something seems like it would be helpful, because then they can give you more money, which is what they do, which is how they have money in the first place. So if you want Jeff Bezos to be even richer, wouldn't you want more people on the bottom to have money? I don't know, it seems like self-defeating, but I'm
Yeah,
not an economist, so who knows.
yeah. It's just like a bunch of like Hunger Games, sort of like like
Very.
that weirdo like governor, or not, excuse me, Texas mayor that was like survival of the fittest as like
Oh yeah.
utility. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
like fuck
that
that.
was full mask off, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
um,
But
but but but it's exactly that, and I think it's just get on the subject of pandemics, and later maybe we'll talk a little bit about these movies. But one of the things that happens in these movies, as in pandemic films, is there's a breakdown of society, and then everyone becomes survival of the fittest. There's always that guy who's barricaded himself up in his little bunker, and he's got a gun and a bunch of resources, and he shoots anyone who comes onto his property. I mean, it happens all the time, right? But in reality, and that is the society we're promoting, and it's a society that certain aspects of society would like to promote, is that sort of frontier view of how humanity should operate, sort of a Mad Max. I called it a Mad Max style hellscape, right? Um, But in reality, when you look at pandemics, you look at what's happening in Texas right now, it's mutual aid groups that have sprung up all over the state. And I think the inclination towards cooperation is much greater than our inclination towards, or certainly we, at the very least, even if it's 50-50, we have the capacity to be cooperative. And there were people from all over the country sending money to mutual aid groups to help support people in Texas, people they don't know and they'll never meet, or they may never meet. People from all over the world were sending. I mean, I sent some from the UK. And I don't know anybody in Texas. I literally no contacts in Texas as far as I'm aware. But I think we have the capacity to do that. And it doesn't make for a great movie, I guess, but it's not nearly as exciting as a standoff at a chain link fence. But in reality, I think people do have the capacity to do that and to band together in times of crisis. Happened after Katrina. It happened during the 2008 crash. It's a question of, I think, ultimately what we promote in society. And right now we promote the pyramid structure, which is promotes a lot of competition and people down here fighting as if up here there's not a sort of a concentration of power. But if there was a lot more collective work and collaboration and cooperation, I think we would be doing much better. But we have to actually foster that. And I think it's, despite a society that does not encourage it, we still see it happen, which, you can just imagine if we actually encourage this behavior, how much better off we'd probably be at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, just like reading the news, because my cousin, he lives in Texas, and I was sharing a lot of the mutual aids, and like I donated some money, and yeah, just seeing like this collective like group effort, like I'm not sure. Yeah, I believe you're a Simpsons fan, Soren, where it's
Yes.
like
Yeah, sure.
I don't know, I just like to do a lot of Simpsons. Where was it like Bart gets trapped in the well, and just like Homer just starts digging, and everyone just starts digging,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Yeah, it was just beautiful to see, in times of crisis. So
Exactly. And it's a real thing. And there's a real phenomenon of mutual, and it's funny, the data, uh, so at the Commoner, which is another website I'm an editor at, which is a much more politically focused, as opposed to science or film focused website. We put it together an article which was a rebuttal to an article that was in The Nation, and it was about mutual aid, and it was about how. So the article in The Nation basically argued that mutual aid should be used in service of the states, that we should use mutual aid to as like a temporary sort of fix, but then replace it with social programs. And we argued the historical nature of mutual aid is just not, that's not what mutual aid is about. That it's fine, those programs are fine if the government wants to put in a social program or whatever, but mutual aid has its own sort of value. But one of the sort of zingers that the author tried to get in at the end is that charity actually goes down in times of crisis, I believe was the quote. And that actually was an argument in support of mutual aid, because mutual aid isn't charity, right? Mutual aid uh, definitely springs up in I mean, over the course of the pandemic, we've seen them all over the
mhm.
country. Maybe charity goes down, but nobody who supports mutual aid is advocating it, or at least mutual aid activists are not advocating a charity-based system. So it's a very weird metric to say, well, there's no way mutual aid could actually serve people's needs because charity went down. I mean, it's like, they're just not the same thing. And in fact, charity is the model that is supported much more by the sort of the capitalist class, because they would rather a philanthropy and charity-based model than anything that even remotely looks like mutual aid. Mutual aid depowers people who are in power, and that is, in my view, a good thing, and to them, obviously, a very bad thing.
Yeah. No, yeah, we completely agree. Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, yeah, just to anyone out there, just please donate to Texas, and we could include that in the bio as well for this
Sure. Yeah,
description video.
there's a bunch of good ones, and the main cities around Texas all have mutual aid groups ready to receive, because they are working hard to provide just basic things, blankets, shelter, food, etc., to their folks.
Yeah. Sounds good. But
Yeah, I
yeah.
say that, like, I think, first of all, I agree with. I'm glad we're having this discussion on this podcast, just in
Yeah.
general. But I think a big part of like that pyramid structure, that class system, it's capitalism. It's capitalism just at its finest, unfortunately,
Mhm.
which is bad for everyone else. There's like a big distrust of like government in general, and like communities of color. Like I see it a lot in my family. Like there is a almost hesitation to even like trust a vaccine.
Hmm.
Almost, thankfully my family is like sane people, so conversations have gotten a lot better about that.
Hmm.
Mhm.
But Like, what would you say if someone was concerned about the effects of a vaccine beyond, like Gene and I were talking, yeah, a little soreness. I think the second dose gives you like a quick fever for a day or something like that. Gene and I have nursing friends that have also gone through that, and they're still kicking, still doing
Yeah.
good. God bless them, you know. But
Well, so I'll just well, the first thing I'll say is you can't spell soreness without Soren, so there you go. But I was kind of hoping you'd make that joke in the intro, but it only just occurred to me. Anyway, yeah. So just as a preface to this, so I work as I am not a vaccinologist. I'm not an immunologist, and I'm not a public health expert. So please read the CDC website. It's actually, they have really good resources they put together for answering basic questions. That so if you have any concerns, you can check those out, and they're written by scientists and public health professionals. With that said, I think it's really interesting. So, Science for the People, this magazine I work at and work as an editor, is really interested in this exact question, and on a broad sense. So, for example, what is how we're interested in things like the history of racism in medicine, for example, or the history of uh, uh, treatment of women in medicine or in science, or things like, right. So these are really important questions that affect, again, the data, again, who got to do the research, who got to produce it, and how it was interpreted, how it was applied, who got involved in clinical trials, whose needs were not addressed when clinical trials were being carried out, who got to do the experiment, who got to ignore the ethics, and who was the victims of that. So these are things that are really important that we discuss a lot, and they come up in the moments exactly like this, right? The consequences of these decisions. So um, I'm going to answer this in two different ways. So first, I'll start with this side, which I think is really important, which is I think that doctors and scientists have, if the rate of compliance for getting a vaccine is very, very low in communities of color, that speaks to, one, a history that is very it's not good. It's very bad, and it also speaks to a lack of trust building from scientists and doctors. And so, you have things like the Tuskegee Experiment, which is probably one of the most famous examples, right? Where you had basically the end result was that black men with syphilis were allowed to die for the sake of science, and it was horrific. It was a horrific chapter in American history, and this is just one of many kinds of experiments like this. It happened in Puerto Rico. It happened, all over the place, and these kinds of experiments where people were seen as expendable, often for racial reasons, or by gender, or both, or other delineators. Um, and so there's a reason to distrust. There's a reason to feel that distrust, and it is incumbent upon scientists and doctors to have the cultural competence to address this and not wave it off, because I think the habit is to say, well, the data is the data. Why don't you just accept it? The numbers say that it's good, so do it. Or that's superstitious, or you're too ignorant to understand what the science is. These are not helpful things to say. They're not. I don't believe any of them. Um, there's a reason to feel these things. Having said that, uh, vaccines are still good, and I think it's really important to be honest. I mean, and it's the same with climate change, it's the same with anything. If you come in and just say, this is now the new thing we need to do, and you don't acknowledge how we got here, like, why is the planet on fire? Like, if you don't acknowledge the origin story of that supervillain, then it's not going to have any meaning, right? They just show up at the end, and it's, a Marvel movie. No, I mean, but no, it's some sort of, it's not convincing, right? And it doesn't build any trust or investment in the process. So I think that's really important, because I think that people are suspicious, and I think they have reason to be, but they don't have reason to be in the sense that the data supports them, but that doctors need to really build that trust. So, and I can talk about the data in a moment, because I think that's important, that these vaccines are, especially the two that are floating around in the States for the moment. So Moderna and Pfizer are very, very good vaccines. and very worth. All the vaccines, from what I can tell, are worth getting if you can get them. Like if there's a vaccine available to you, you should get it, for COVID-19, or for SARS-CoV-2, the virus. But these two in particular are very, very good. I mean, they're exceptionally good vaccines, much better than like the flu vaccine, for example, just much more efficacious. So that's the first side I'll speak to, and on the second side I'll speak to is more not targeted necessarily people of color, although certainly if people of color have this view, then it speaks to them as well. But it's towards the people who are distrustful of authority, and I think this is really important. And I'm maybe going to tip my hand a little bit here and say that I identify as an anarchist, and I don't have a lot of love for the government. But I think I wrote an article actually for the Commoner about COVID-19 pre-vaccine, etc. This was just about how where we find ourselves in the course of the pandemic, and how people are responding to it. So at that time, well, even now, obviously, but at that time, a big thing in the news were the anti-maskers, right? People refused to wear masks. And why didn't they want to wear masks? Did they deny that it was that they worked? Some did. Some did. It's not a tenable position. Masks are extremely effective, but what a lot of them said is, "I'm not going to do what people tell me to do because therefore I am a sheep, or I am following what the government says. And if the government tells me to do something, I'm going to do the opposite." First of all, just doing the opposite of what someone tells you is also conformist. But even if it weren't, take it from somebody who is actually an anarchist and doesn't like the government. That's not what resisting the state is about. If you want to resist the state, that's fine. But what we're talking, that pyramid structure I referred to before, is the same problem. Capitalism is one example of a pyramid structure, but so is racism, so is sexism, so is the state. Right? It's a system where a few people have a lot of power and a lot of people don't, or they have some semblance of power or something that looks like power, but ultimately doesn't really map on. We talked about this in the Chomsky interview that uh, 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 the correlation between what most people want and what the government actually does is almost non-existent unless you're in the top 10% of society. I think it's the top 10%. And this has been repeated. This study has been done several times in various analyses on the same data, but that's the end result of it. So that's another structure that's a problem. So it's fair to say, like, why would I do what the state tells me? But that's not what expertise is. Expertise is different than authority. And there are some very good anarchists who have written some useful perspectives on this. But basically, the idea that information and data are the domain of just the powerful is a bad thing. You don't want the government to be the only ones with access to a vaccine, right? You want the whole country to get it, right? You don't just want senators. There was that whole thing where they were doing this pageantry where they were all getting vaccinated, and I think it has some benefit because it tells people this is real and good, and
Mhm.
we're getting it, and you should get it too. So in that sense, it's good. On the other hand, it's like, why are you getting it? We need it.
Yeah.
You have
Or
government-funded healthcare.
yeah, or I was gonna say it was like someone like Rand Paul, where he gets it and he was like actively like screwing people over and like, you know, acting in
Exactly.
bad faith.
Well, exactly, and I think that there's some level of that certainly for people who are power brokers. I think that's a real thing. But then you just get people who are on the street who are just saying that. So there's a twofold thing. One is that, again, expertise is not authority. I know we sort of conflate the two because authority can colloquially mean somebody who knows what they're talking about because they are a scientist or a doctor or whatever, or a public health expert or whatever the case is. Um, so that you can be an authority figure in that sense, but you don't necessarily have authority over somebody. You just have expertise in an area, and it's reasonable to listen to somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Mhm.
It is not equivalent for somebody who has no science background whatsoever to make claims about a vaccine, and somebody who is a vaccinologist to make claims about a vaccine. They're just not the same thing.
Yeah.
So that's the first part, and the second part is that. The other thing, if you want to just focus on liberty, personal liberty, and this whole thing, this whole weird, in my view, quite weird libertarian view that exists in America, it's not uniquely American, but it is a very strong presence in America. This sort of Austrian school view that the government should leave me alone in all situations at all times, even if it means I die. Um, well, uh, that's fine, but you should consider that you do not have the liberty. Maybe you may say it's my liberty not to wear a mask, but of course you don't wear a mask to protect yourself, although it does offer some protection. You wear a mask to make sure that other people don't die, and it's much the same for vaccines. right? You don't get a vaccine. People who say I should have the personal choice to not get a vaccine. Well, I get what you're saying, and it would make sense on some level. If it's cancer, I actually understand that a bit more, because you're not going to pass cancer on to someone else. But a vaccine prevents you from getting other people sick. By not wearing a mask, by not getting a vaccine, by not social distancing, by not washing your hands, or whatever it is that you're going to do, by traveling when you shouldn't be traveling, you are impinging on other people's liberty. You are saying, I don't care that I'm going to make you ill and potentially have you and potentially kill you, because I decided my liberty was more important than your life. And surely nobody who supports that kind of thinking uh, would support that in reverse, where they were the ones receiving the illness. Surely they think they have the right to not get ill,
Hmm.
right? But they just don't see it as being connected to other people. And again, this comes down back to this idea of cooperation, this idea of atomization, that I exist as an island and I don't interact with anyone else in society. Of course you do. Everything you do, you're touching handles, you're going on the bus, you're going to the supermarket, whatever it is you're doing, you are interacting with other people. And it's really important that you aren't putting all of them in danger for the sake of your liberty. What about their liberty? You're now hurting their, it's like saying I have the liberty to just spray a gun everywhere all the time, not have a gun, but spray a gun just constantly everywhere all the time, because otherwise it's an impingement on my liberty. Well, what about all the people who get hit by your bullets?
Hmm.
That doesn't make any sense. You've you've basically said my liberty, everyone else's liberty is subservient to my liberty. And if you believe that, then you're not actually interested in liberty at all. So I think those are really important points. So I think, we should trust expertise. It's not necessarily authority. I think we should be cognizant of other people's health and well-being, and understand that our choices affect other people. Um, and I think these are really important to take in. And I think, again, it's reasonable to address people who feel like their community has been wronged by the medical establishment, by pharmaceutical companies who continue to be terrible. I'm not defending them. But instead to say, well, what does the science say? What do the experts? What does the experts say? And what do the experts, even at the companies? And I think this is something, one of the questions I know that we wanted to discuss was, what are ideas that we want to, that I think are important to disabuse people of, to misconceptions that should be addressed. And
Hmm.
one of them is that, and it's something that frustrates me, and that I've had to wrestle with, to try and explain to people, which is that any data that comes out, because company A is bad, which is something I can accept, fine, company A is bad, therefore all science there is made up and fake. Well,
Hmm.
that's not true, right? Their business practice might be the fact that let's say they charge you, $500,000 for your vaccine dose. That's not the case, but let's say they did, right? That's a decision the company made, but doesn't mean the vaccine isn't good. Actually, in fact, quite the opposite. I mean, if nobody would pay for it, probably, if it was 500,000, it didn't work. Theoretically. But yeah. So that the idea, and so you get you get this in agriculture, right? That Monsanto's a bad company, therefore all their crops are going to kill you. No, they're probably not going to kill you. The company might starve your country out by putting a bunch of copyrighted seeds all over your agricultural land, and then forcing you to sort of pay money to Monsanto. That's evil. That's bad. But the seeds aren't going to kill you. They're just copyrighted, and that's terrible. And we should fight against that. That's reasonable. We should say, there was a big campaign before the vaccines ever came out that there should be free vaccines for everybody around the world. It should be completely free. That didn't happen in many places, and largely companies got a hold of them, and they are privately owned, and they are making a lot of money off the government paying them for the vaccines. That's unfortunate. That's bad. We can talk about that, but the vaccines are still good. And I
Yeah.
think that's a really important delineation to make, that the scientists at the company are not all sitting there doctoring data all day. These are people who got PhDs or undergraduate degrees or graduate degrees at universities,
Hmm.
and did their time and studied and learned and went and just applied that same exact expertise in the context of industry. But they're no different than somebody at a university, or any other scientist for that matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was just gonna say, just listen to the experts. Like, I'm not sure if you heard or you read. I don't know. I know he's a Republican, but was Arnold Schwarzenegger had like a good, like, I guess on his Facebook he got the vaccine, and the comments had all these crazy people, but he had a very like nuanced take where it's like, hey, like, if you want to listen to how to get like ripped arms, like I'm like one of the best bodybuilders, However, I'm not like a scientist, so it's okay to admit you don't know, or it's not weak to admit that you're not an expert on something. And like however many YouTube videos you watch, you won't have a doctorate or degree or any applied science expertise in vaccines after going down a rabbit hole. And also just kind of he was saying that if your circle of like people you trust gets smaller and smaller that you could listen to, you're going down a rabbit hole of misinformation. So don't do that.
And he's 100% right about that. It's a real issue. And and it's interesting, the anti-vax, it's something I've been discussing with people for quite a long time, which is on vaccines in general, well before COVID-19. I'm very sympathetic to, not to the arguments, let's be clear. The anti-vax arguments are terrible. They're just not based in reality.
Mhm.
But I am sympathetic to the emotion behind them for the people who feel very strongly about it. And it's often, let's say it's a mom or whatever who's concerned about her kids. Okay, fine. I don't consider her uh, my enemy. I would like to disabuse her of this idea because it's bad, and it's bad because it puts my kids in danger. If I had kids, it puts her kids in danger. It puts other kids in danger. It puts especially kids who can't get vaccinated in danger. Right, this is the idea of herd immunity, which is quite an important concept.
Mhm.
Um, so in that sense, I think it's harmful, which is, it's not harmful, but the culprit behind what she thinks, what this hypothetical person thinks, are people like Del Bigtree uh, and these other sort of grifters who have no background in the subject whatsoever, but who have slick production setups and are able to produce movies. You have that terrible movie Plandemic, that
Oh,
absolute nonsense, just riddled top to bottom with just provable like lies, just lie after lie. You could just go through it. I mean, it's actually made, that's just that one clip that sort of got out before it was sort of shut down from a bunch of websites, I think probably quite rightly, because it was just absolute nonsense. Um, but there's, it's slick and it looks good and it looks like a real documentary with real experts. But the reality of the situation was just not, it wasn't grounded in anything. But the people who are perpetuating these things frequently know exactly what they're doing. They're trying to sell books, they're trying to promote their Vita brands that they want people to take instead of vaccines or whatever the case is. And they're, it always amazes me when people are willing to prop up somebody like Adele Bigtree or that kind of figure, or even Andrew Wakefield is a completely discredited quack, who sort of perpetuated this autism and vaccine myth. This People are willing to trust these figures who are making money off of the misinformation, but then will reject pharmaceutical companies for making money off of medicine, right?
mhm.
I appreciate that the profit motive is not a good way to run a healthcare system. I think it's terrible. But I'd rather get the medicine than a book that says medicine is fake. I have no real expertise, but you should trust me because, you know, whatever. I'm appealing to your concern about your children, which is reasonable, but in terms of the emotional reaction. But you know that why you would accept one but reject the other seems very strange to me. And the difference is, and you might say, well, what about the reverse? Why would you accept a pharmaceutical company but not accept somebody who's written one of these anti-vaccination books or websites or whatever? Well, because the person who, they may both be crooks, but one of them has scientific expertise. So I'm going to go with that. They know what they're talking about. They have data, and they can show you the data. They can show you the peer-reviewed research, and they can demonstrate that it works. And also, let us not forget that these vaccines are one of the most incredible inventions in the history of humanity. I mean, the reason that polio is hardly a thought anymore for a lot of the world, not everywhere, but a large part of the world, is because of vaccinations. The evidence is in front of us. Was polio invented, made up? Do people think it didn't exist? These are real things we're able to actually vaccinate against, and it's essentially eliminate from society. I mean, even MMR, right? Everyone gets it now, and it's good. I think people should get the MMR vaccine, but it's very uncommon, although it does happen. In
Mhm.
fact, happened to my partner, that you get any of the diseases that the MMR vaccine vaccinates against. And so I think I think people can just look. I mean, it's such a black and white fact. Just look. I mean, no one's in an iron lung, no one's, these things are not happening anymore. Why do you think that is? It's not magic. It's not because something changed in the water, it was because
Mhm.
of vaccines.
And going off of that topic, Soren, is one of the questions we had outlined was just kind of you're talking about the vaccine and how it was, just the logic of this research, and some people were, I guess, maybe excuse me, skeptical, like the development of it was fact checked, or excuse me, fast tracked, and just kind of the fact check of that this research was based on other SARS studies, things like that. They had like almost like is this the right term? Like almost like a gamer's strategy book with them, like kind of developing it. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one way to look at it for sure. Sure, yeah. So it's a good question, and so as I said before, I'm not somebody who develops vaccines or works in that area, and this is mostly for just people watching this. So I wouldn't call myself a layperson because I am a molecular biologist and I do understand the terms and the ideas in that sense. But I am a layperson in the sense that I don't follow vaccine development, in the literature the way that somebody who is in this area might, because it's just not my field, right? I don't follow climate science papers day to day either, unless it's like a major sort of thing that everyone's really interested in. I still trust climate science research though, because my colleagues there probably trust me on DNA repair, which is what I focus on, right? This is it's a reciprocal relationship, um, and I trust that their peers are holding them accountable. So other climate scientists are holding climate scientists accountable, and immunologists are holding other immunologists accountable, and in my field, so on and so forth. So so I say this because I'm sort of coming at this a bit like a layperson in the sense that I trust vaccines because they go through a really rigorous process, and I was unsure about the logic of a fast-tracked vaccine. I didn't understand how it's possible that you could develop a vaccine so quickly. So I looked into it, consulted the experts, and yeah, it's exactly as you say. So there's a number of factors here. One is that speaking to the power of government, or the power of, I would say, not necessarily government, but certainly social cooperation. One way of which can be through state funding. We were able to, in the states, for example, fast track vaccines by providing enormous amount of funding to scientific researchers and to companies. And what that meant was a couple of things. One is you don't have to go through the process of applying for funds, waiting to get where it's sort of a piecemeal process. They could just go straight ahead and plow ahead with the next step in the pipeline. Another thing they could do was they could embark on riskier projects. So if a pharmaceutical company wants to um, do a phase 1 trial, then see what the results are, and is it worth going for a phase 2 trial based on the data, they didn't have to do that. They could just do all of it. They could even do it in parallel to one another. They could do a lot of these steps in parallel to each other. Obviously, you have to do some things ahead of time. So you have to show, for example, that it's not dangerous before you start doing it in humans. You can't just go straight to humans and say, oh, we're doing it in parallel. It doesn't work like that. But there are phases of the clinical trial process that you can parallelize. And they were able to do this because you wouldn't do this normally if you were just wagering your own money. But because they're using state money, they were able to do this without worrying that, oh, we're going to lose billions of dollars if this doesn't work. Um, and so that allowed them to move much, much faster. Another thing, as you say, is that they were basing this on other research. So SARS and MERS are also coronaviruses. They were not very contagious, but were extremely deadly. So that's why you probably heard about SARS back in the day. This is another, by the way, bait and switch that Plandemic and a lot of grifters do, which is say, oh, they knew about SARS. Oh, there's patents around SARS. Yeah, it's a different virus. It's not the same virus. Having a patent on SARS CoV-1 does not, or CoV, I guess it was just called, doesn't give you anything special with relation to SARS-CoV-2. Yeah, it's absolute misinformation. But what we did learn from it is that they're similar viruses. So there were aspects of SARS-CoV one and MERS and similar viruses that we could learn from. And in fact, at the time, there was a lot of development done on vaccines for those viruses. But because they unfortunately killed people as opposed to spreading across the whole population, there wasn't actually a need for a vaccine because it kind of killed itself out. wasn't actually very evolutionarily, I suppose, beneficial for it to be so lethal, because it just ended up killing so many people, and also, as I say, wasn't as contagious. Another thing is the technologies used in these vaccines, particularly the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine. So these are messenger RNA vaccines or mRNA vaccines, and I can get into the details of what that means. But ultimately, what the main point is that this is a new kind of vaccine, which might seem, ooh, that's scary, but actually messenger RNA. Well, first of all, messenger RNA is just is a thing that exists in all our cells all the time. All this is producing is a messenger RNA from that codes for a small piece of the virus. It can't become a whole virus. It can't do anything like that. But that small piece is then recognized by your cells, and then you can generate the necessary immunity so that you can fight off the virus if you ever encounter it. And this technology has been around for quite a while. And in fact, there are a lot of vaccines that were in development with messenger RNA technology, and now there are a lot of them are being fast tracked because what COVID has done is force those things, the COVID ones through, proven they work, and they work really, really well. And so now they're looking at this for Ebola and for a lot of other kinds of diseases. And so actually COVID has helped spur other research, and also other researchers helped with the COVID vaccine. So there's a lot of factors that go into this, but I think it's reasonable to have those fears. The last thing I'll just say, and this is something that I think is a legitimate thing to bring up, I genuinely do, and I don't because again, I think it's important to meet people where they're at.
Yeah.
We were able to fast track these studies because the vaccine, the virus was so contagious that they had more test cases than they thought they would, and so they were able to actually test the efficacy of the vaccine in a much quicker fashion. So the two things that, or two of the things that you want to test with the vaccine are safety and efficacy. So they could test efficacy just because it was so prevalent and so contagious. On the other hand, safety is a real question. So how do we measure safety over the course of just 1 year? And to be honest with you, um, you can't. You can measure safety over the course of 1 year, but you can't measure safety over the course of 10 years because you don't have 10 years to measure it.
Yeah.
But, and this is something that I was wondering about, because I always valued vaccines for the long period they take to really do these longitudinal studies. But what I have learned, and it's been very helpful, one of my former professors, an immunology professor, he really understands this in excruciating detail. Like he is, and he's a very, very good speaker. He's worth checking out. His name's Dr. Wilmore Webley. Anyway, he talks about, and it's a way of framing it that I guess I just hadn't thought about, but makes perfect sense, which is that vaccines are a medicine, just like any other medicine. And the way medicine works across the spectrum, whether it is a pill, a vaccine, a surgery, a treatment of some kind, is it is a cost benefit ratio always. So, you know, does this treatment of whatever kind it is cause more harm uh, than it does good, right? So if I have cancer and I'm definitely going to pass away from this cancer, it's terminal, then I'm definitely going to try something like radiotherapy or chemotherapy, where the side effects are very, very deleterious, right? I lose my hair, it can make me very sick, makes me, whatever. But to get rid of the cancer, I'll do anything, right? So the cost benefit ratio there is very different than if somebody just stubbed their toe. You wouldn't give them chemotherapy if that was a treatment for a stubbed toe, because the consequences of chemotherapy are much worse than a stubbed toe. So it's the same with vaccines. So here they had to look and say, well, is it better to get COVID-19 and all of the potential consequences, including death, or is it better to give someone a vaccine, which we know for at least the course of a year, and those studies are ongoing and continue to go forward. They're not stopping these safety checks and monitoring. Is it better to give them a vaccine that will prevent them from getting COVID-19 at extremely high rates? So it's very, very effective. So almost guaranteed you won't get at least the basic strain of COVID-19 of the coronavirus if you have this vaccine. Is that preferable to whatever side effects that we've seen from the vaccine so far? And the answer is yes, absolutely, absolutely. We do not think that it is preferable to get the virus. In fact, the CDC has this very explicitly, because there are some people who think they'd rather just go contract the virus and develop natural immunity, whatever that means. There's no such thing as natural immunity. All right, we live in a society where we are, I should just cut it there. We live in a society, but but we live in a society where everything that we do is impacting our health and our immune system, and et cetera. And getting it naturally, it makes no sense. It's not a real thing. Coronavirus in general only really is here, not because it's not natural. It certainly is a natural virus. There's no suggestion that it was man-made, but it's linked to things like climate change, and it's linked to things like globalization, et cetera. Like it is a man-made virus in the sense that it is man-made because the conditions were set by humanity. It is not man-made
Right.
because it's not an artificial thing, right? So don't go try catch coronavirus or any other kind of disease to get natural immunity. It's not going to be any better. It's probably going to be worse. And in fact, the evidence right now suggests it is worse. If you get coronavirus, aside from all the consequences of getting COVID-19, we're not entirely sure what the long term, you have some basic immunity for a short time, but we're not sure that it lasts beyond that. Whereas we know the data on vaccines, and if you get both of your shots for the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, you are going to be in much better shape. We're talking 95% protection. So don't do that. It's a bad idea.
Yeah. So definitely, please, whoever's out there, please get your vaccine when the opportunity arises. Because you could get COVID twice. I had a friend that had it twice now. So it's not
Reinfection is
fun.
a real thing. It's a real thing.
Mhm.
And as the virus mutates, this is something I think also people have asked, and I've asked, which is, what's the point of getting a vaccine? Because there's these new variants that the
Mhm.
vaccines aren't as good against. Okay, fair enough. First point on that. One, slowing it down, even if you get 20% protection from the new variants and 95% against the old variants, you have two benefits there. One, you've prevented the new variant at least a little bit potentially from getting at your body and your health. You've also prevented the common variant from circulating, which leads to new variants. So that's really good. And if you get the jabs, the shots that you need for the current vaccines that protect very well against the common variant, which again is most of the variant at this point, you are primed for when there are subsequent booster shots, if and when. And Moderna apparently is working on one for some of the new variants, even though they've shown that their vaccine is still pretty decent at against the new variants. And so when those new booster shots come out, you just go and get a top up, basically. But if you don't have the first two shots, well, now you have to go get 3 shots in order to accommodate this new vaccine potentially. And so it's really it's a protection for now. It's a setup for later. It's future proofing yourself, if you like that kind of tech
Mhm.
babble. But that's what it is. And I think that people should really think of it like that, because it can feel futile. But I think that there's a real value in protecting yourself now, and also getting yourself ready to be protected again in the future.
Yeah, exactly. Because I guess that goes into the next topic. We're all trying to get vaccinated. Can you explain just to just the common person, just the breakdown why herd immunity, why we're is so crucial, just the herd immunity itself.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's herd immunity is one of the main um, and most crucial reasons for getting vaccinated. So there are people in society who can't get vaccinated for whatever reason. They might have an allergic response to vaccines. They might have an immunocompromised condition that prevents them from getting a vaccine, or that it won't do anything for them, or whatever the case may be. Those individuals rely on everyone else being vaccinated in order to survive. Right? These are people who, if they come in contact with things that would not necessarily kill us, although they might, certainly like COVID-19, they will definitely kill these individuals. And so if those people go through society and they never encounter anyone who wasn't vaccinated, their chance of contracting that illness is basically zero. But if they go through society and there are a bunch of people who could have gotten vaccinated and decided not to, they are now at risk for contracting that illness, which is again life threatening. So by vaccinating and making sure you and your community are vaccinated, you're protecting people who are extremely vulnerable, who don't have the option to get vaccinated, and they didn't make a choice. Again, to going back to this idea of choice, I choose that I want to get vaccinated, or I choose I don't want to get vaccinated. It's my body. Okay, well, again, by you making this choice, uh, they didn't get to choose and now are at risk because of your choice. So that's what it's about. Um, and again, it can any sort of these illnesses can spread from people who don't even realize they have it, because they have a good immune system, etc., to somebody who's very immunocompromised, and you might not even realize. It's not like you're sick it's like, oh, well, if you're sick, you'll just stay home. Well, that doesn't work like that, because I might get COVID-19 in a really mild way and don't even realize I have it. There's these asymptomatic cases, et cetera, but I might pass it on to someone who is vulnerable. And so it's really important for herd immunity that everyone get vaccinated, because, again, there are these individuals who can't. And I think, to take their life into your hands because you've decided that you don't want to do it. Again, not based in the science. I can't
Mhm.
stress this enough. It's not based in science to resist these vaccines. Um, it might be based in the history of science. Fair enough, but it's not based in the science. And the science says these things are good and protect people. So you should definitely do that for your sake and for the sake of others, which is really the core aspect, is to have that empathy for people who don't have the option.
Yeah, exactly. Because I don't know. Some people have compared like being a carrier, carrying these germs, carrying the virus, to almost like being a bioweapon.
That's exactly it.
And
That's exactly it.
yeah.
And I want to raise this
Mhm.
point. I don't want to give oxygen to this, because I don't want to give too much oxygen to this, because I think it's a pernicious, and uh, it is an appealing narrative, but it's not one that's, again, grounded in reality. So I think there's a lot of people out there who are fearful of vaccines for what they contain. And by the way, everything. So while the recipes, in the sense of specific manufacturing processes and so on, are patent protected because companies are terrible. Um, it is the ingredients are available, and they're available for every vaccine ever. So you can go look it up, but you can look it up for Pfizer and Moderna, and they'll tell you straight up what's in it. One thing I'll tell you that is not in it uh, is thimerosal, which is something that a lot of individuals have been concerned about in the past. It is a form of mercury, but it is a form of mercury that is completely harmless. It's been shown to be harmless in every case that it's ever been tested in. Um, it was a preservative. It was meant to keep vaccines from expiring, essentially. Um, but despite it being completely healthy, I presume, in an effort to increase the compliance, because they didn't want this non-issue to become a barrier to people getting vaccinated, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines don't have thimerosal. They have no preservatives at all. So I think, even if you believe, and it's not real, right, that mercury is going to somehow hurt you, in the context that it exists in these vaccines, even if you believe that, and again, it's not true, but even if you believe it, these vaccines don't have any of those things. So get the vaccine, but get the vaccine even if it had thimerosal in it, because it's not harmful. It's actually making it so that you don't get a vaccine that's gone off, or some of these other elements, or ingredients in vaccines that people look at suspiciously are there to prevent bacteria from growing there. They're antibiotics, or they might be adjuvants. An adjuvant is something that increases your immune response, so it has no impact other than increasing your immune response and giving you a better effect of your vaccine. These are all very legitimate and reasonable things to want to improve when you're getting a vaccine. You don't want to get, I mean, would you rather have a vaccine that you inject and it's filled with bacteria and you get blood poisoning and die? No, obviously not. Nobody wants that. So, it's good to have an antibiotic in there, but the antibiotic is not going to do anything to you. It's only going to kill bacteria. And the same with a preservative. It's just there to make sure that the vaccine doesn't go off, so that you get you don't get expired milk, basically, in your
Yeah.
as your medicine. And I would imagine people would want that, right? If you're going to get the stupid thing, at least let it be bacteria free and not expired.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And yeah, I mean, like, if they have, these companies, if they're, they have a patent and they're, I guess, devil's advocate, like making, profit, I'm sure that they would want to make it as safe as possible. Right.
Yeah. I mean, look, I have no, if I were to just rely, if I had to take their word for it. So, for example, let's take an example that is from this pandemic, from these vaccines, from these companies. I think it was Pfizer. I could be wrong about this. Anyway, they put out their clinical data just a few months ago. It hadn't been published yet. It was just there was a press release. It's interesting to see the data. I'm not interested, in the sense of, it doesn't convince me, because it's a company saying this is how great our vaccine is. Isn't it amazing? What I want to see is a peer-reviewed article in a journal, and not the Pfizer blog, saying this is a good vaccine. That has happened. It has also happened with Moderna, and it's happened with a number of other vaccines. All vaccines go through numerous studies, comparisons, and safety metrics, et cetera, to make sure that they're up to snuff. But I think it's reasonable to say I'm not going to just take the word for it, because why would you trust the profit motive isn't going to generate necessarily a good medicine? There's no reason to believe that that would be the case. It could be a good enough medicine that it just sort of does the job, but just barely, right? As long as they can make a little bit of profit off it, that would be good. But that's not the case, because they have to get, in order for this to pass through regulatory bodies, and also for the scientific community to endorse it in any way, shape, or form, the medical community, it has to go through peer review. It has to be evaluated by other scientists looking at it, who don't work at these companies, to say this vaccine is safe, it's efficacious, and uh, uh, people should inject these components into their body. I mean, it's a serious thing to ask people to do. So you need to really go through that process. But that's what happens. And once that happened, which it did, I was much more comfortable with it. So I think people should really look at that. Is it coming from the company, or is it coming from a peer-reviewed journal? And peer-reviewed journals are not infallible, but they are a much better system than pretty much anything else we have. It's how we know anything about science, is because 10 different people or 10 different labs all come to the same conclusion, and other labs have cross-referenced to check and make sure that the data isn't nonsense, or they've tried to repeat some of the work to make sure that it works. Like, that's how science is. And so it's not a perfect system, and it's fused with all sorts of problems, but it is a functional one for the moment, and it is how we develop any kind of medicine. So if you take any kind of medicine, you should take a vaccine.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
should take medicine. Medicine's good for you.
Yeah, vitamins, yeah, anything. Trust the science. And we're just kind of winding down this vaccine 101, but I had one quick question before we go on our last topic. Because I asked my mom if you had any questions to ask you before
Sure.
we started recording. And we did talk about the strain. She was, asking about the strain and pretty much answered that. She was asking any side effects for older women, especially since she had friends and they're all kind of the same age group that you could talk about to look out for.
Yeah. So it's actually kind of interesting. So is there a specific age range? I don't want to
Oh yeah, yeah.
impose.
No, it's all right. Yeah, she's her and her friends are in her 60s, 70s.
60s, 70s. Yeah, I mean, I think especially for that age range, I think it seems like there's not a huge risk. I think there's been some question as to the efficiency of the vaccine for older people, and I think the other reality is that we don't necessarily know why that might be the case. Maybe your immune system just starts slowing down as you get older. I mean, how many old people get sick and then get pneumonia, which is like extra, and then they die suddenly, right? Or whatever the case is, like the and maybe that's a result of long-term just immunodeficiency just developing over time. That said, in terms of side effects, it seems like for Pfizer, and again, I'm not a doctor, if all of these women should speak to their doctor and get real advice based on their medical background and history, and really ask your doctor as many questions as you want. Doctors are there to answer your questions. They are absolutely, that's what they train for, and they are meant to do that, and they should do that. And if they're not doing that for you, get a new doctor. Get a doctor who's going to answer your questions and be responsive and understanding that you are distrustful or you're worried. That said, from what I understand, it seems like the side effects are extremely minor. The main thing is Pfizer. You're very fortunate to get Pfizer, and I hope I get Pfizer too if
Hmm.
when I get my vaccine, because I haven't gotten it yet, as I said before. But the Pfizer vaccine seems to have be much easier to take, in the sense that you don't tend to get the soreness, the aches and pains like Moderna. You might get some, and in fact, somebody, my partner's father, somebody at work got it and had almost no effects on them, in most by most metrics. But people I know who've gotten Moderna have felt, a bit tired, or it's been very sore where they got the injection. This doesn't last more than 24, 48 hours. I mean, it's nothing, but it's uncomfortable. Okay,
Yeah.
it's uncomfortable, but it's not COVID-19. So
Yep.
and I think, having some soreness at age 70 versus having COVID-19, I'd rather have some soreness. So from what I understand, that seems to be the prime concern. But I'd also say, please go to the CDC website They have these incredible frequently asked questions sections that they've developed specifically for exactly these kinds of points. And just type into Google like COVID-19 vaccine, uh, Pfizer, CDC. And then there's not just CDC, there's the Mayo Clinic, there's all these different health facilities of complete experts who are, if they're in this, if you don't like the CDC because it's the government, go to the Mayo Clinic, which is a university, it's academic. I mean, where so it's not a company, it's not a government, and if that's your concern, and you'll see they comport with each other because they're all working from the same data, and the data is very strong, and they of all because they're really invested in people getting vaccinated, they have developed videos. Frequently asked questions, etc. And I would recommend checking those out. And they can get into more detail, saying for your age group, for your background, for your sort of history, here's what the general trend is. And even then, I wouldn't take that as gospel. I would say, this is what I've seen. To your doctor, say, this is what I've seen. It looks like it's okay for me to get this vaccine. What do you think? And your doctor will tell you. And I think that's probably the best way to go about it. Definitely
Gotcha.
don't take my advice. I'm not a doctor, but I would say talk to your doctor and go that way.
No, no, for sure. I'll relay that to her, and also she's probably listening right now, and she'll listen to this podcast when it's out. So yeah. And then the last question, since this is also such a crucial part of where we're at in this distribution and the vaccine rollout.
Sure.
Um, After we get the vaccine, so like me and Diego got it,
Mm.
we want to stay safe. Keep we don't want to get it again, what have you. We have all this protection. Can you talk to just the aspect of we're still building up this herd immunity, like things that we still should be doing, like double masking, not traveling, testing,
Mhm.
anything that's essential to after this you get your vaccination till we get to the herd immunity.
So first, I'll just to mention. So obviously, we know testing, not traveling, social distancing, washing your hands. These are very effective. Wearing a mask. Something that is a bit new from what I understand. I mean, again, it's not my area, but from what I've sort of encountered, seems to be this idea of double masking. And the CDC has a very useful with illustrations page on masks, which you can check out. But basically, what their advice is, and the current advice seems to be that if you have a disposable mask and you have a cloth mask, to double mask in that sense, so you put on the disposable mask and then you put the cloth mask over that, can offer a little bit more protection. So that's a reasonable thing to want to do. Two disposable masks, they argue, doesn't really do anything and actually might disrupt the main thing, which is, again, what is the point of you wearing a mask? So that you don't project onto other people. And to do that, to prevent that, you need to have a seal, right? You need to make sure that it's completely covering your whole face, or your nose and mouth. And so, one with a metal sort of thingy to go over your nose so that it sort of goes down. That's the kind of mask you want. And if you have two masks, it might disrupt that sort of flow and make sure that and create maybe ways for moisture to escape, which you don't want. So that's something to maybe avoid. That, and also trying to double a disposable within a KN95 mask. KN95 masks are really, really, really good if you can get access to them. But to double it up with a disposable does nothing and might actually again add holes or gaps where you just end up losing effectiveness. So double masking with a disposable cloth mask is a good idea. All these other ideas are good ideas. Definitely recommend. Now, after your vaccination, this is really, really important. Really want to stress this to people. It is not a license to do whatever you want. It is absolutely, you should act as if you didn't get vaccinated. And I think we should do this for as long as we can. As long as we can. I think people will get sick of it over time. That's okay. But at some point, that'll happen. For the time being, we should act as if we still nobody has a vaccine. Let's say there is no vaccine. Just pretend everybody has COVID all the time. And the reason that you want to do that is a couple of reasons. One, as I said earlier, we want to slow down the spread of the common variant to prevent new variants from arising. We also want to prevent the spread of the new variants. If we continue doing the things we've been doing, social distancing, etc., then we can continue to slow the rate of the spread of all of these variants, all of them. And that'll gives us a chance to get rid of them, right? If nobody has the South Africa variant anymore, then it can't spread anymore, right? So if we just continue to do these practices is really important. Another thing that's important is your first vaccination gives you a certain amount of protection, and we didn't get into it too much detail, but both vaccinations are very important for the Pfizer and the Moderna, that you really need to get both of them. There's very little data on the single dose of the vaccine. There's some, and it looks like it gives, for one, it gives like 50%, and the other it gives like 80%, but it depends. And also they only measured this, again, the data is not strong because they only measured it after a very short amount of time, say 21, 23 days. So um, it really depends on that second dose. That gives you that 95% immunity that we're talking about, and that lasts for a very long time. So that's really the gold standard. So first of all, your first vaccination might not give it to you. Even after your second vaccination, you should still act as if, because let's just assume, and that last 5%, maybe you will get COVID, and then you don't want to spread it to somebody who hasn't gotten the vaccination yet, right? You just want to be as safe as possible. You want to slow that in its tracks. And the other thing too is that when you get your first dose, you don't get immunity right away. In fact, there's a long period of time. I could be wrong about this. So I would definitely check this, but it's something like 12 days before you even start to see the effects of the immunity. So you can get the vaccination and then immediately go get COVID from somebody. So don't do that.
Yeah.
You want to just get it. You want to then continue to operate as you were and avoid getting COVID, and then build up your immunity and let your body actually deal with it was just given. It was just given a little representation of the virus so that it can understand what it is. And so that when you get that second dose, you start creating these memory cells that really are able to give you this long-term immunity. And that's really, 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 really important. That is where you're going to get that long-term benefit from. So, and even once you have that, as I say, it's better to just not spread it around as much as possible, because I don't even need to have the virus. If I don't even need to actually contract the virus. If I shake hands with somebody who just coughed into their hand and I get it on to me, and then I shake hands with somebody else, I may never get it because I'm vaccinated, but I still could give it to someone else, right? And what's the last time you shook hands with anyone? Let's keep it that way, right? Let's
Yeah.
avoid it at all costs. And then, at some point, hopefully we'll get back into a more normal state. But I think people would rather do a couple more months of social distancing rather than, restart the whole process because we've got a new variant the vaccines don't work against and everybody is sort of back to square one. I feel like
Right.
that would be worse.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, just keep staying safe, keep doing what you're doing. Was it stay calm and carry on?
Yeah, keep calm and carry on. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
So
So yeah, I think that's really the gist of it. But I hope people do. When I say do your own research, I mean look at experts. Don't go reading weird blogs that are by people who don't know what they're talking about. Go read actual scientific communications from universities. People synthesize this stuff for you. You don't have to read the academic papers because you can, but they can be difficult. I know I find them difficult, and I am literally a PhD student. But go, and especially if it's not your field. I mean, if it's not my field, I half the time don't know what anyone's talking about because it's so different than what I do. But I can read, for example, if you go to Nature Journal's website, I believe it's just nature.com, or the Science magazine, which is another really excellent academic journal. They have articles written by their news section, which are sort of they end up being a synthesis of the literature, so you can see what the latest is going on in the academic world in terms that might be a bit easier to understand and a bit more accessible to people. And also, the details aren't all that interesting to everyone, right? But you want to know, like, I hear that masks or double masks are a good idea. Well, guess what? People have studied this. Oh, I hear that this vaccine has 95% or it's supposed to be really good. What are the numbers on that? These articles will summarize those points for you in a way that's hopefully understandable without you having to read, um, CD4, CD8 readouts in a fax graph, which means nothing to anyone unless you study immunology. So, get the gist of it. And I think that you can do that and get it from really good sources without sort of going down that rabbit hole towards the Dell big trees of this world,
yeah,
who should
I
be abolished.
I always say just like look at like the web design of the stuff that you look at. If it looks like it's
Often a
designed,
clue.
yeah, if it looks like it's designed by like a 5-year-old that has like like was it like the Space Jam site that's still up
Yeah.
from the 90s? If it looks like that, then that's a bullshit site. But
It probably is. I mean, let's be clear. You can be duped by marketing and companies with slick websites,
right,
but it is a hint. If the only place you can find this information is some person assuring you that they are definitely in on some secret knowledge that no one else has, as opposed to, I mean, one of the great things about science, one of the bad things about science is that we often put articles behind paywalls, and it shouldn't be that way. They should be open access. I fully support that. If anyone ever wants an article, just send me a message. I'll get you access. But on the other hand, we are quite open. So, our data goes out there. We have to provide a lot of data to a journal when we want to publish something, and then it is open for other people to critique. So when we provide it, then the reviewers get to look at it. These are other academics in our field, and they get to say, "Oh, this data you've shown looks a bit funny. It falls perfectly along. Your data says 1, 2, 3, 4. That seems kind of suspicious." And they can challenge you on it and force you to have to redo experiments, to provide new data, to test it themselves. And then even once it gets published, it can still be challenged by people who say, this was reported, but we've shown that this isn't the case. That's how science works, is open. What if you ever encounter anyone who tells you, no, 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 trust me, I have secret knowledge, nobody else knows, I think you should question that approach, because it's probably nonsense, and they're probably trying to sell you something.
yeah, fucking grifters.
And
But
by the way, it's exactly what, as I said earlier, it's exactly what, I mean, I'm not saying that they were making any of this up, but when Pfizer puts out a PR statement, it's exactly the same. They're saying, trust us. We're not showing you the details, but just trust us. These are the results. Well, I don't trust that yet. I want to see the data. I want to actually see what the paper says. The problem is with the blog is there is no subsequent paper. They just make the assertion and move on with their lives. So, as long as you can back up what you're saying, it's fine. But if you can't back it up, we've got a problem. And a lot of these hucksters don't have any way to back up what they're saying because it's not true.
exactly, yeah. So I guess that covered like all the questions that we had in our document. Unless Diego.
No, I mean, that was. I thank you so much, Soren, for coming on to do that. I know we still have a little bit more to talk about but yeah, I mean, thank you so much. That was
Yeah.
Sure.
really
Thank
informative.
you. Yeah, thank you, good sir. This was like a mini 101 on the COVID vaccine and safety.
I hope it was useful. I mean, again, and science is always changing in terms of, this was something a lot of people have been frustrated with. Oh, we went to the experts, but they had the advice one week, and the next week it was something else. That's actually a good sign, right? That means that as new data and information came in, the scientists changed their view on what the best thing to do was. They're working with the latest data to give you the best advice. And the more time has gone on, of course, now we now know for sure, like there's no question, washing your hands, social distancing, wearing a mask, these things are proven to work. In the beginning, there was different kinds of advice from different people on what would be appropriate and would work. But as soon as data came in that said, yes, this really does work, we've shown it works, it's very effective, then it became sort of the official advice of the public health community, and then we move on. That doesn't happen in anti-science environments. New data gets presented and it gets waved away like it's not real. Well, that's not science. So science changing is a good thing. It can be frustrating, but it means that we're trying to get you the best information that we have. If you hear that there's a plane crash and there's 3 survivors, and you prepare supplies to go get those 3 survivors, but then you get new information that there's 5 survivors. Well, okay, well, let's prepare for the first information wasn't wrong, but it's the data has been updated. You could say, well, we should have stuck with the 3, or why didn't you know there were 5 in the first place? Well, it takes time to get information, and maybe we didn't see the other 2 guys, but now we know there's 5 people, so let's prepare for that. And we change with the new information. We adapt, and that is how society should work, right? We should adapt to new information and new evidence, and we should go forward from there. And as evidence amounts in a particular category, so a lot of evidence for masks being effective, we should acknowledge that and not pretend like it's not true, because it is true and it's very good. So we should do it, and we should acknowledge that and work with and build policy around that and shape our behavior around it. So that's really important. And I think that can be a sort of a trap for people where they say, if it changes, it must not be true. Well, no, it can change because that's the way it's designed, and it's designed to not be dogmatic.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say, look at Cyberpunk 2077. They put it out unfinished, and now there's multiple patches and it makes it a better game, or it's
Exactly.
playable. Yeah.
Exactly. Although maybe not the best example because people seem to really not be happy with that game, and I hope people are a bit happier with science. But
Yeah.
we've got a lot of work to do to get people invested in science, and I think that that starts with having open and frank conversations and not pretending like people's concerns aren't legitimate, at least emotionally, even if not in the data.
Exactly. Cool. So I guess that leaves us to our last topic.
Yeah, the one movie related topic of the day.
Right,
I mean,
lighter stuff.
talked
We
about
should start a
important.
science podcast.
Yeah, that'd be dope.
I would say, but yeah, we're gonna talk about pandemic movies now, which are quite frankly not as fun to talk about during an actual pandemic. But
Not at all.
also, Contagion made it onto iTunes top 10 for like most of 2020. So maybe there's something wrong with us.
Well, it's funny because it's funny because I think I've seen pieces of Contagion in the past, but I haven't seen it beginning to end. I have seen Outbreak, which was sort of the spiritual predecessor, came out in '95. We watched that in school, and it was like teaching us basic stuff about. I don't know why we watched it, but we did in a biotechnology class, and the purpose was to sort of teach us about how pandemics happen with patient zero and this whole all these words and lingo. I really just think the teacher wanted to show us a movie, but uh, so that was the last thing I saw there. But I almost watched Contagion just for this podcast, which I'm always happy to watch a movie for this podcast or for any podcast, but definitely this one. But I looked at it and I watched the trailer, and I said, we're living this right now. This looks miserable. Why would
Yes.
anybody want to watch this in the middle of COVID-19? It seems like sadistic.
Yeah. Yeah,
Is
it's like I watched it for the first time last night, actually.
Okay,
And
there you go.
yeah, I was like, God, I'm like, I want to go to bed now. Like
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. But like, you have these scenes of Gwyneth Paltrow just from like, again, going off of memories and some and the trailers, these scenes of her like in the hospital and she's miserable and sick and whatever. And then you have Matt Damon not believing that his wife is dead and whatever. We've seen actual video of this exact thing happening over and over and over and over again. It's hard to get invested in a fictionalized account. I think pandemic adjacent films can be really, really exciting and really engaging. So, for example, 10 Cloverfield Lane, it's a great film. And that's, is it even about a pandemic? Who knows? But it is, that's, I think, and actually captures some of the psychology without playing with the imagery of pandemics, which is actually quite traumatic and horrible to watch. But the psychology of being cooped up with somebody and that kind of like with the sentiment of lockdown, I think in 10 Cloverfield Lane, for example, is very palpable. So yeah, it's interesting. So you guys watched Contagion, but does it hold up? Was it actually good?
I thought it did. Like it was like this like kind of like a zeitgeist of like, I don't know, like what was gonna happen in 10 years, or like foreshadowing, because like I'm watching them like crowd the supermarket, and sure enough, that happened with toilet paper. There was probably like some like people just like, I don't know, they weren't, a lot of people, I remember when I was buying like toilet paper, water, it wasn't exactly like that, but it was pretty close. This breakdown of almost society, so
like
Well,
it's that thing where like, yeah, back then when you watch it, you're like, oh, this is kind of what would happen, but it's also like a movie, so probably not. But like some of the best movies are like a representation of reality. This one is like it was just like actual reality, with like some I think it holds up great. I think it's a fantastic movie, like top 5 Steven Soderbergh.
Maybe I will need to actually watch it then. Yeah.
Yeah, I think and a killer score by Cliff Martinez, who did.
Oh, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, the same year he did the score to Drive, which of course is like legendary. And I think this one is like right up there. But there's like little stuff here with like the stuff about like online journalists kind of like feeding into paranoia that I think just the way we treat journalists on film needs to kind of be like readjusted right now. Just American culture, maybe there's I got there, but like that's not a problem with the movie. That's just a problem with me fearing reality at the but I think it's a great film. Maybe put it off for a little while longer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny because like at the end of the trailer, there's these brilliant like shots of like empty streets and empty stores, and it probably had a lot of impact in 2011. But I'm looking at it going, yeah, we saw these photos last year, and it was real, and it really happened. So and they were even more amazing because they were real, and they really like those shots of like in China, which is just like these incredibly busy streets, but just completely empty, and it was like a desert. I mean, that was. But I saw that, I had that experience. So like when it happens in the trailer, you're like, yeah. So he also lived through COVID-19, but like 9 years ago.
Yeah.
Or 10 years ago. But yeah, no, I mean, and then I think there's a question of apparently, like a lot of people look at sort of the science of these outbreak, these pandemic films like Outbreak and Contagion, and weirdly, they found that The Happening was the most scientifically accurate of all these films. Weirdly, but
People,
it might be my favorite.
yeah.
But no, it's they definitely didn't, by the way, and everyone should go watch The Happening. But it's it's not the most accurate film or really good film, I would say. But what they said was that Contagion was much more accurate than Outbreak was, and that they'd sort of improved a lot of the science in it, even despite having still some caveats to that. And it's always funny watching science in movies, especially anything related to biology, where really I think the thing that's the funniest about it is, yeah, they get things wrong, and people who are very niche in their field get really irritated by certain things. Like viruses can't become airborne when they start off as parasite born, and that's true. I'm making them sound like nerds. It's me. I mean, I'm the nerd. But and that's fair enough. But then it's even simpler things than that. You don't have to get into like, oh, can a virus do this or that? Or my area, which is genome editing, and it's the bad guy in Spider-Man, it's the bad guy in Rampage, and it's the bad, it's CRISPR is the evil, thing. But like, you don't even have to get that niche. You just have to get into like, they develop a vaccine for a virus in the space of like a day, or it's someone's blood cures the entire population, or whatever. Just things that like, or even worse. So time scale is completely nothing. It's nonsense in these films. But even worse than that is when they string together. This happens a lot more in like TV and like crime shows, but also in other things, where they string together a bunch of scientific words. So they'll say something like, this protein is mutated into DNA, and it sounds really good, but it means nothing, and there's absolutely no context or meaning. Like there's no scenario in which that sentence means anything in science, but it's all the words, but they've just been arranged in a very strange way. So that's always funny too. So I think it's always worth taking these movies with a grain of salt, but I think what they can capture, as all movies can to some extent, is the sense of empathy and understanding our psychology. So I think that's where pandemic films, I think, do hit something very useful, which is, how do we react as a society? Do we, and also they can reflect our worst instincts. We could all, turn into this sort of Mad Max world, or we could actually cooperate and collaborate, which again may not make for a great film, but is a thing that really does happen, and I think people should be made aware of.
Yeah.
I think there could be a great movie about like collaboration in times of hardship. That's not me saying I want to see a movie about these last couple of years by any means.
Right.
Feel like we've been talking. But I would just want to dial back for 1 second, because
Sure.
Up like pseudoscience and stuff like that. You and I have had conversations about Spider-Man, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
And The Flash, the first season, which is, like, I think a spectacular season of television.
It's genius. It's fantastic.
It's so good. What happened?
So
Right. What happened there?
But you also, I'll never forget, you brought up like the hilarious pseudoscience that show had in particular, where it's just like, it's nonsense. It's less realistic than like Star Trek and Star Wars at times,
Oh yeah, for sure. Not that those shows ever really. The thing is, And it's kind of a funny thing because I think it's very, it's easy to be a Neil deGrasse Tyson sort of figure about movies, which, makes you suck. I mean, he
Yeah.
sucks.
Yeah.
But
Insufferable.
it's insufferable, and it doesn't contribute to anything. And it doesn't, if your point is to get people interested in science, that doesn't do it. I mean, in my view, it's not good science communication. What you want to do is it's fun to use science fiction movies as a way of introducing concepts to people, and then you can say, and in reality it happens this way, or this would have taken 6 months or whatever, as opposed to pointing out all the sort of issues. But I also don't mind if a film just makes, one of my favorite Christopher Nolan films, and I'm not a huge Christopher Nolan guy, but it's Interstellar, which spends a lot of time dealing with real science in the first chunk of it, and then at the end it just goes sort of completely off the deep end into like weird, like emotional cross time and space connections. And to be, what, I loved it, absolutely loved it. And I loved it because there's no evidence or it's not based in anything to do with science, but it doesn't even pretend to be. And I like that. I also like when you get a movie like Star Wars where they just say we have a warp, well, no, I guess Star Trek, they have a warp drive, or in Star Wars they have they can go into warp speed or whatever, some
Mhm.
sort, not warp speed, what is it, where they go really fast,
Light speed.
hyper drives or
Yeah.
right. um it's fake, right? It's not a real thing, but fine. Like, you sort of set the table. You said in this universe we've figured out perpetual motion. In this universe we've whatever, and that exists here. Or like, it's the same in the Marvel movies. Like Iron Man somehow is this perpetual energy source. Fine. You've sort of said that. It's when you take things that actually exist and we know how they work, and then you've made up things about them, that becomes a bit more frustrating. But even then, it can be useful. So, like I said, I work in genome editing, which is sort of playing with DNA, I guess, is a way to sort of think about it. And the movie Gattaca, which you may have seen, is a really, 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 really useful film for explaining what the potential consequences of this kind of fiddling around with genetics can lead to, where it creates this sort of genetic caste system, and sort of relating to what you said earlier. And that is something that concerns me. Now, would things play out the way they did in Gattaca, or would they play out the way they did in any number of movies? Maybe not. But I do think that there is value in using them as a way of opening the conversation. So I think that just because something's scientifically inaccurate doesn't mean it can't be the beginning of a good discussion. And I think that's where, say, Neil deGrasse Tyson sort of misses the boat, because he just goes, "That's not how the sky moves. The sky moves counterclockwise if you're in the southern hemisphere," or whatever. It's just
Yeah.
like, okay.
He's just CinemaSins at this point.
He literally is. He's scientific CinemaSins. It's
Mhm.
extremely tedious. Um,
No, but the best, he was like, BB-8 is clearly CGI because he wouldn't be able to roll in the sand. And then they're like,
and it
well,
was real.
iconic thing. And
God damn.
so
Yeah, that was so cool. What a cool practical effect.
He could have just said that, or had said nothing. That wouldn't have mattered.
yeah, I don't know. But I don't know. I mean, like, okay, so we had this whole discussion about like an actual pandemic. Obviously, I'm like pandemic movies, but like Contagion is like maybe the one great one. Outbreak, I actually think is kind of fun.
It's fun. It's got a good cast.
Mhm.
Yeah, everyone who starred in it though has like been canceled horribly.
Also that.
Yeah.
Just wow. But like I think of like zombies movies in particular like tend to be more
They're very pandemic-y for sure.
Yeah.
uh Dawn of the Dead, excuse me. Like Gene and I talked about it for last Halloween with the Romero zombie stuff. And seeing the people reaction to that, like in the beginning of that film, that felt very like, oh yeah, that was the year we've just had, like it's very like authentic, even though it's something it's not reality also. So I don't, are there even that many good like pandemic movies? That's a weird thing to talk about right now during an actual pandemic, but like I can't think.
Well, you kind of get weird, like sort of pseudo pandemic films. Well, certainly you have things like 28 Days Later and things like that that are quite, a lot of zombie movies fit that. But you also have the concept, a good example in even films like Children of Men sort of hit that same psychological note without necessarily being a pandemic film, right? And it's sci-fi, right? It's about a world where you can't have kids, and it's also one of my favorite movies. I really love Children of Men, but it's not a pandemic film. And I think that's what it comes down to, is it's films that capture the psychology of it. That's why I think 10 Cloverfield Lane really works, whether or not the pandemic is even really a part of the narrative. It sets the conditions.
I'm a little long, so I apologize for that. I hope we're not keeping you like.
No, it's totally fine. It's totally fine. No worries.
Yeah, no. Thank you for like going through all these questions and staying longer than we thought. But yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's no worry. And, just so people are aware, and this is, I think it's really important, I think, to communicate where this information comes from. So a lot of what I talked about today came from the CDC. It came from the Mayo Clinic, from different sort of authoritative, but not authority necessarily, sources. These are people with expertise. And I think that the reason I had to go to those sources is because I'm not an expert in these areas. And I think that this is a good example. I'm an example, I suppose, and anybody could be an example of being this, to synthesize these ideas, say, I don't actually know how they know that that this vaccine works. How do they know that? Well, look it up and look it up, with a reliable source, and you can do it yourself. And I think it's really good to do that, and to do it in a way that is critical, and that you're thinking, well, where's the source? Who's writing it, and for what purpose? If it's something like the Mayo Clinic, right? The Mayo Clinic, what advantage? They're not Pfizer, right? They have no. You might say, okay, fine, I don't want to go to Pfizer's website to learn about the vaccine. Fine, that's fine, that's reasonable. What about the CDC? Right? Oh, I don't want to go to CDC. Fine, go to the Mayo Clinic. Go to Cornell. Go to Vanderbilt. All these places have information about vaccines, medicines, etc., and you can learn from them. And there's nothing special that I did that other people couldn't do as well. The only advantage I have is that occasionally when somebody says like messenger RNA, I know what that is intimately because it's part of my work. But other than that, I don't make vaccines. So, and if you don't either, you can do what I did then. So go and read about it and feel comfortable. And it's good to feel comfortable about it. And most importantly, talk to your doctor.
Yeah, wow. I think that's a fantastic way of wrapping up the episode. So Soren Hough, thank you so much for joining us again.
Sure thing.
Along with all the other stuff we've talked about today, where can people find you online, or do you not want people to find you at all? Because that happens.
Oh no, I mean that ship sailed a long time ago. So you can find me on Twitter at Soren Hough. You can find my film website, moviefail.com, which I work on with a number of other people. It's a bit more dormant these days, but we sort of come up in fists and starts. You can go to Science for the People, magazine.scienceforthepeople.org, where there's a whole bunch of our articles for Science for the People magazine that are all about radical science and the intersection of science and society. It's really interesting stuff, I think, and you can read about People's Green New Deal, and you can read about biopolitics and all these other really cool subjects, study of science under occupation, things like that. And then last, I do recommend checking out The Commoner, which is a UK outlet. It's an anarchist outlet that it's completely horizontally organized. It's completely funded by Patreon. There's no other source of funding, so feel free to fund us if you'd like to do that, if you think that project is interesting. But also just come read our stuff. We work really hard on putting out cool articles about everything from Cyberpunk 2077 to football, soccer, to mutual aid, to COVID-19, et cetera. It's all covered, and it's sort of through that lens, that political lens that we have over there. So definitely check those out and read more science, get involved, get interested. Whether or not you care about science, science cares about you, and the decisions that are made in the scientific and medical world impact you. So you should be invested in them and know what they're talking about, without falling prey to people who are trying to take advantage of your goodwill and good nature.
Yeah, no, trust the science. No, nope.
And next time, maybe we'll have a lighter subject. Hopefully the world will be in a better place to have a lighter subject discussion.
I hope so. But it's good and it's important. And I think these kinds of conversations, hopefully, I don't want to give it too much importance, because it's, but these kinds of conversations, and if you have these with your family and your friends and that sort of perpetuates, we can hopefully meet in better circumstances. If we don't have these conversations, I think we're much more likely not to have better circumstances in the future. And not to end on a dour note, but I think it's important for people to just be cognizant of, if you think this is the last pandemic that even you're going to face in your lifetime, it's not. So, and we were warned 10 years ago that this exact thing would happen, and it's happened, and it will happen again. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if we're prepared for it, if we meet it head on, if we look at the science and we understand and learn these lessons. I mean, just to give a little bit of a positive spin on that, the fast tracking of vaccines is a thing we never thought we could do in a way that would meet the needs of the moment. Now that we've done that, it could change the way we make vaccines forever. So we actually now have new tools because of this pandemic to deal with the next pandemic, should that come in the near or far future. So I think we have there's a lot of good there, but we have a lot of dismantling of that pyramid if we want to handle it in an efficient way and in a way that doesn't leave people behind.
Well said. Gene, now where can the people find you? Good luck topping that.
Oh, no. I was just going to say, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram, Gene9892. And please check out my video tutorial on how to register in LA County for the COVID vaccine. If you just type in that, you'll be good.
Yeah, links down to that and everything else down below on the YouTube and SoundCloud descriptions. I believe you can actually see the descriptions on iTunes and Spotify, but I don't think anyone actually goes through those. So YouTube and SoundCloud, social medias, Twitter at the Waffle Press, and I'm at the Diego Crespo on Twitter. But check out the Waffle Press, the rest of our shenanigans, because March is monster movie madness. So we're going to be ranking kaiju movies, talking Toho.
Ooh, fun.
Versus Kong. Oh, really quick, Soren, what is your thoughts on the MonsterVerse? Just since you're here, what do you think about those movies?
My thoughts. So I unfortunately wasn't as invested in the 2014 Godzilla film as other people were. I didn't quite understand the hype around it. That said, who doesn't love big monkey punch big lizard? I mean, that's great. And my favorite thing is that they had the exact same problem that they had back in the original films, where King Kong is just the wrong size, so they just made him bigger, and they don't explain it, and it just is what it is. And I think that's great.
I love that.
I think when they get a bit too serious about this, and they lean into the seriousness and away from the metaphor that, of course, Godzilla represented, which was like nuclear war. It's a bit of a strange decision. Like, lean more into the metaphor and less into the who cares if King Kong's bigger? It's more fun that way. So whatever. And if it gets the metaphor across better, then great, awesome. So there you go. And I'm intrigued by the new film. I wish we had big screens to go see it on, but we have what we have.
Yeah.
Sorry, but yeah, we'll be talking about all of that for the rest of March. Also, Legend of Korra retrospective coming at you, which will be available. Some book 1 will be available on Patreon. Book 2, February, took a lot out of me, so we'll see how this goes. And a bunch of other stuff coming up. So go check out the Patreon. Support us there on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, iTunes, where you can get, again, early access to a bunch of other stuff. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there. We have been professionally unprofessional.